Sometimes a father would come, sometimes a writer or a poet, or another time a simple lathe operator would appear. Educated and sophisticated old ladies came. An old scientist with his wife came from Leningrad. Again, sometimes the old and frail Bishop Jonah would stay for a while. He was retired but had retained a sharp mind and memory. He knew the services well and specialized in church history. So many people came that it is impossible to write about each and all, but I do want to remember Nadezhda Petrovna, who helped so many of us, who saved so many of us and took care of us during the time Father Arseny was still in camp. A passionate and impetuous woman, Nadezhda Petrovna was also very active. Once I watched her while she was talking to one of Father Arseny's spiritual daughters. I cannot remember now what they were talking about, but I kept looking at her hands. Her bony hand would form a fist, and then would open again, so that her fingers were drumming on the armrest of a chair. She drew designs on the table, pulled the tassels on the tablecloth. You could see that the nerves and tendons of her hand were joined with her thoughts and tried, by its movements, to clarify for the listener what she really meant and to convince him of what she considered to be the most important point. When the conversation became passionate, her hands would transmit the power of her thought, the fire in her soul. I couldn't hear her words, but I could understand what she was saying, could guess what the argument was all about, and how important it was for her. Sometimes she would raise her hands to the sky. This meant the listener didn't understand her. Gradually her hands became more calm and came to rest on the armchair, and I understood that the argument was over and that Nadezhda Petrovna had convinced her interlocutor. People came in and out, wrote, received answers, and carried away peace, faith, hope for something better, and a piece of the soul of Father Arseny himself. I often observed that Father Arseny himself received something from each person who came, and he awaited their return eagerly. Each person you encounter enriches you, brings you a piece of light and joy. Even if he brings you his grief, you will find in everything the will of God. Seeing the person come to terms with his grief, you rejoice together with him. But there are some among my spiritual children who renew me every time I meet them. They are my light and my joy. Many times I prayed with Father Arseny. We stood in the twilight room. The oil lamps would be shining on the icons. Father Arseny would be serving. He read very clearly. You could hear each word. He would be entirely into his prayer, and you, who had just gotten off the train and were still carrying the bustle of the city with you, could slowly join in with him, forgetting everything around you, seeing only the icons of the Mother of God and hearing only the words of the prayer. Somewhere inside you would light up with the joy of being united in the great mystery of God's service. On his knees, Father Arseny would quietly read the prayers for priests. Meanwhile, peace and quiet would enter inside you, and you would start to pray to God for his mercy towards you. You would ask him for forgiveness for your sins. You would beg him to grant your petitions. The room no longer exists. You are in the middle of a church where the oil lamps are lit, and the holy faces of the icons of the Mother of God, of Vladimir and of Kazan, look at you as if embracing you in their forgiving mercy. Father Arseny leads you in the light-giving and warming light of prayer. To be able to pray with Father Arseny was always a great joy for us all. Pyotr and I were almost the same age. He was 1 year older. We went to the same school. This is no longer Tatiana talking. But we're in different classes. We were just acquaintances, becoming good friends only in senior high school, after which we each went our own way. He went to Moscow University to study art, and I went into engineering. Pyotr was always a serious child. Start again. Pyotr was always a very serious and a very good man. He read avidly, loved art, theatre, paintings and music, but I never noticed any inclination towards religion. I lost track of him for a few years, and only after I finished my studies did I find out that Pyotr had graduated from university and written a book that was a result of his research. Then, suddenly, a few years later, I was told that he had become a monk and a priest, which utterly amazed me. Madly in love, I got married, but a year later my wife left me and married a friend of mine. This was so sudden, so unexpected that I was losing my mind. I couldn't come to terms with what had happened to me. I considered suicide. I was casting about for help, and sometimes even took to drink. I recalled the church. I went to talk to a priest, but this didn't satisfy me. I remembered Piotr and decided to seek him out. I found out where he was serving, so I went and found the church. It wasn't big, but it was very old. I remembered entering this church. I went in and stood to one side. Piotr was serving the liturgy. There were so many people in attendance and praying, and most of them were intellectuals. The liturgy came to an end. Everybody went up to kiss the cross and receive a blessing, and I saw they all kissed Piotr's hand and that he spoke with love to almost all of them. This all seemed strange to me because I wasn't used to it, and also it was hard for me to connect all this with the Piotr I knew. Having blessed everybody, he went back into the altar. A few minutes later he came out again in his cassock, having removed his vestments, and came directly over to me. It felt as if he'd known all along that I was standing there. There were still many people in the church. That morning I'd had a drink, and it probably showed on my breath, so that people avoided me, but I didn't care. "What's happened?" asked Piotr. This question and the fact that he was sure that I was in the church because something terrible had happened to me irritated me, and I answered, "Nothing. I'm here by pure chance." The answer was obviously clumsy and foolish. Piotr did not leave me. He asked somebody to call Father Ioan, another priest who was in the church, and told him, "Father Ioan, would you please serve the prayer service? I can't today." And turning to me, he said, "Let us go to my house." He lived close by. We walked in silence. As soon as we were in his house, I told him everything. He did not even have to ask me. My grief, my pain just poured out of me. I spoke and sobbed, maybe partially because I wasn't sober. Father Arseny, I knew by then that he was not Piotr anymore, listened to me. He did not interrupt me, nor did he attempt to console me. People walked in as I was talking and tried to speak to him, but Father Arseny told them that he was busy. When I finished my long and confused story, Father Arseny simply and casually said, "You are guilty of this. You pushed your wife away. You forgot her soul, her ambitions, her desires." He spoke for a very short time, and all of a sudden I was embarrassed because of his words. It was as if a curtain had fallen from my eyes. I suddenly understood things I hadn't noticed before, hadn't wanted to notice, and I was almost relieved. I stayed with him for 3 days and left in peace. I'd found God, the faith, and the church. Since then, my old-time friend has become my spiritual father and my advisor. Years have passed and my life has changed. I got remarried. I loved my new wife. I received honorary titles and was successful, more successful than I really deserved. But whenever I came to see Father Arseny, I always felt like a young and experienced student before a renowned white-haired professor, and at the same time he was my best friend. Camp and exile tore him away from us, but he was always present in our hearts. When we discovered after his stay in the special camp that he was in the little town of R. I went regularly to visit him, and I would like here to tell about these visits. Today I'm going to see Father Arseny. As always, I'm restless and excited. I look forward to this meeting with enormous joy. I share with him all my news and then am silent. No, there is more to tell, but I'm afraid I will tire Father Arseny. I will take too much of his time. He is silent and looks intensely at me and somewhere above me. This look of his makes me uncomfortable. I begin to see all that has happened to me lately, and mainly I see my bad deeds. At this particular moment, Father Arseny would say to me, Why did you hurt this man? You and I are both Christians. We must not act this way." I had been expecting him to say these words, and that is why I was anxious when I was on my way to him, because I was ashamed of my deeds. I did what he had taught me never to do. I began to tell him what had happened, trying to find excuses for my actions, to find reasons for acting that way, but as I listened to myself, I understood that I was in the wrong. When the time came for my confession, I felt embarrassed. Father Arseny became almost angry. His eyes darkened. I wished the ground would open and swallow me up because I realized how awful and sinful I had been. We prayed for a long time together. He prayed very easily, very lightly, praying Praying with him was always cleansing, elevating, and uplifting. He was teaching me, showing me the right path of faith, and he never ceased to be my closest friend, to whom I could tell anything, and of course about the most important thing, faith and the way of life of a believer. He told me much about his own life, about himself, about people he had met and who had left him enriched somehow. This taught him to love everyone and to pray to God. Father Arseny loved people unconditionally, seeing in each the image of God. After my confession, we would sit and talk. From these talks, I would draw knowledge of the faith and found in them spiritual strength and guidance. Renewed, I left him and lived from one meeting to another by the advice he gave me. I had a feeling that he was so remarkably caring and thoughtful only with me, but of course this was a naive thing to think. Much was said about Father Arseny. People recounted miracles that had happened to him. I remember that once, during one of our conversations, I asked him about these miracles. He grew sad and becoming pensive. He said, "Miraculous? Miracles? No, nothing ever happened to me that could be called a miracle." Every priest, hearing the confession of so many people, giving communion and accompanying the dying, guiding his spiritual children, every priest has remarkable spiritual experiences. The same thing can happen to lay people, to any believer, but very often we cannot see the magnitude of what is happening and do not see the will of God, his hand, his providence, his leadership. Yes, what happened to me and what I saw around me shook me up, maybe trembled, so that I clearly saw the will of God. I didn't stop to think whether it was a miracle or simply the result of amazing coincidences in my life. I've always believed, and I still firmly believe, that God brings us to everything that happens, and therefore, whatever way we take, we must recognize only his will in everything. And it is only by understanding things in this way that a man can see the will of God. Many events in which I participated amazed me, and I said to myself, but this is a miracle. But then when I realized my own nothingness, I understood that it is not for me to see a miracle. Everything in life is a miracle. The main miracle is that by the will of God, man lives on earth. Believe in this. I saw that my question had disturbed Father Arseny. Another time I asked him, "Father Arseny, we, your spiritual children, often talk about the fact that spiritual fathers frequently have the gift of prophecy or mind reading, and I'm sorry to say we talk about the fact that we think you have this gift as well." And Father Arseny interrupted me sharply, saying, "Don't continue. You don't know what real prophecy or mind reading is. A priest who deals constantly with people, hears their pains, their difficulties, and their joys, naturally knows the human soul. If he is sincere in his love for his children, if he remembers what he knows about them, he unwillingly begins to notice and to observe each movement of their souls because he knows them and because he is in constant contact with them. Take the mother of a small child. She sees and notices all his actions, and she can foresee what he is going to think or do because he is her child and she loves him. In this same way, a priest notices everything in the person who comes to him and therefore can tell what that person wanted to say. All this isn't prophecy or mind reading. It is a kind of spiritual observation which is common to many. True prophecy and mind reading is given by God to a few chosen people, people like Father John of Kronstadt, but certainly not to us sinful people. Let us stop this conversation. It is useless," said Father Arseny. Letters, excerpts from the memoirs of O.S. I came often and stayed near him for long stretches of time, so I came to know his life well. Father Arseny received many letters. These letters almost never came in the mail. Most of them were sent to friends in Moscow, who in turn entrusted the letters to Nadezhda Petrovna when they came to visit Father Arseny. Letters came from different towns, as many of Father Arseny's friends had spent time in camp with him and were scattered all over Russia after they had been set free. Each and every letter was read attentively. Each sender knew for certain that he would receive an answer on which he depended to determine the direction of his life. I often observed that while he was reading a letter, Father Arseny would embrace in his inner sight everything he knew of the life of the person who had written to him. This person would become present in Father Arseny's room, standing next to him, and continue to tell about himself, even events that he had not written about in his letter. Having read the letter, Father Arseny would be pensive and centered, sitting at his desk, sometimes looking at the branches of trees swaying outside his window. It seemed he was listening to the author of the letter telling him what was on his mind. With his mind cut off from the rest of the world, Father Arseny would write his answers. Sometimes crossing himself, he would pray, sitting in his armchair, and then go on writing. For Father Arseny, there were no ordinary letters. Every one of them was important, and he knew behind each a suffering and worried person. Sometimes Father Arseny would make several attempts at starting an answer. He would put the letter away, then pick it up again. You could see that he was worried or in doubt. Sometimes he would sit thinking and praying for a long time. The room would be lit by the oil lamps which stood before the icon, and by his desk lamp which tore out a circle of light from the darkness of the room. The light would fall on the unfinished letter. Father Arseny wouldn't notice it when somebody entered the room, so absorbed was he in the person he was writing to. He would pray for that person, begging God to send him or her his help, and all of a sudden Father Arseny's face would light up. He would get up, stand before his icons, bless himself several times, and then sit and just finish the letter that had come together for him. Through his love for his spiritual children, he would obtain from God and the Mother of God help for them. You cannot count the hours, the sleepless nights he spent praying for all of us. He was rich in love. There was enough of it for all who came to him. But this love did not come easily to him. It was through his years of work, prayer, difficulties in camp, imitation of the fathers of the church, and the advice and experience of people of deep faith that Father Arseny obtained the all-encompassing gift of love for people. The grace of the Lord was with him. Once I came in as Father Arseny was writing a letter. It was obvious that the letter did not come together as he wished. He blessed me and said, "Forgive me, I cannot talk now. I am upset. God is punishing me. I am unable to write this letter, and I must. Please wait." He started praying. I sat in an armchair. He prayed for a long time. When he stopped, he sat down and started writing. He wrote one page, then put his pen down. I had been dreaming or had fallen asleep and awoke to his words. There is sometimes a duality within me. The man and the priest go different ways, and this must not be. For instance, now my duty as a priest dictates one thing, my human feelings another. The way of a person is difficult and multifaceted. To understand oneself, to evaluate one's own strength, is a difficult task, and not everyone can undertake it successfully. It is my duty as a spiritual father to weigh what this person is able to do and to show at the right time what he or she has to do. If the spiritual father makes a mistake, the person is lost and his soul is lost. To reason or to trust in his own judgment is detrimental to the spiritual father. It is not permissible. He has to trust only in the will of God, which he can find in prayer, and only in prayer. For example, I just received a letter from a very good man who has led a complicated and beautiful life and who has won many a battle within himself. He was now begging me to give him my blessing to become a priest, but the life of a priest, a real priest, was always difficult, and now it is even more so. Some people think that it means only serving in church, but no, it is an extremely difficult and all-encompassing way of life. You have to forget yourself completely and give yourself to others. You must take upon yourself the souls of hundreds of people and lead them. Not everyone is strong enough to understand this way of life.